Hello, dear learner. I welcome you to the lecture 4 of week 12. And this lecture is in continuation of lecture 1, 2, and 3 of week 12. And the topic of the lecture, as you know, is the notion of postmodernism. So, in our previous lectures, we have already covered the meaning of postmodernism, then the historical background of postmodernism or how it originated. Then we understood that what is modernism, what are the important tenets of modernism, and why they have been criticized by postmodernism. Because we have learned that postmodernism arose as a reaction or as a response to the process of modernism. Besides that, we have also discussed some of the theoretical or important premise of the theory of postmodernism. And there we have discussed how, in multiple ways, the modernist forces have caused lots of issues and problems in the present society, which has been hidden under the garb of truth or the universal notions or various generalizations. Now, we have seen in our first lecture when we were discussing the meaning of postmodernism, in that I have explained that we can understand postmodernism in two ways. First is as a theory, and second is postmodernism for understanding the society. So, in our last slides and lectures, we have discussed postmodernism as a theory in some detail, and in this lecture, we will be talking about how postmodernism is helpful in understanding the society. If you remember, in our lecture 1, I said that the scholars believe that our present society or the 21st century is a postmodern society. So, how it helps in understanding the society, what explanation it gives for the society. So, keeping in mind the theoretical constructs of postmodernism, which we have studied already, they will be helpful in understanding how we are going to analyze the type of society which postmodernists are actually analyzing. Postmodernists do not see the society in totalizing term, but in a fragmented manner. Since they do not believe in essentialism, they do not believe in foundationalism, they also reject meta narratives or grand narratives. Hence, naturally, they will not see society or not understand society with the help of certain grand narratives. They do not believe that liberalism or Marxism can provide, or they are the only narratives which can provide solution to the human woes and problems, because they believe that there cannot be one solution for all the segments of the society. Our society is very much fragmented, divided in the sense that there are multiple identities. And you know that the rise of identity movements have drawn inspiration from the postmodernist ideas. And that illustrates the relevance of postmodernism also. The rise of various identity movements in the recent times illustrate that our society is not that unitary or it is not that uniform as we have been believing till now. There are multiple differences hidden under the garb of some grand narrative or some grand concepts. So, in the face of grand narratives, the subjectivity of the people is neglected and people are expected to follow these grand narratives. So, in the face of a very grand theories or big theories or it totalizing theories, you find that the individuals, they become helpless, they become powerless, and they are not able to advocate their own viewpoints, their own perspective, or their own narratives, because they are so over empowering, they are so dominating that it is very difficult to challenge. It is very difficult to challenge them by the single individual. And therefore, it leads to the neglect of the subjectivity of the individuals, because there can be various subjective understanding which are based on one's experiences, which are based on one's life, which are based on the lived experiences. These are not taken into consideration because they may or they may not fit into the grand narratives. And the third is the fragmentary and subjective approach helps in drawing attention to the poor and marginalized section of the society. This is basically talking about the utility of having a fragmented approach. Because here we are talking about understanding society. So if we have a grand theory and if we have a theory which is talking in terms of fragmentation, then how the two perspectives can help in analyzing the society in different ways. Of course, the grand theory talks about a universal vision, a grand vision of bettering the society, where it neglects the diversities which are prevalent, the various differences in social and economic status, in terms of the level of literacy, in terms of access to natural resources, in terms of the distribution of the fruits of production. They may not be equal. And they may not be getting recognized in the processes of decision making also, because their voices are not heard. If they are not recognized, then their voices will also not be heard. For example, the tribals, the various marginalized groups in the society, various caste groups, various ethnic groups, the poor woman, and so on. So therefore, if we have to understand the reality of our social condition or our society, we have to adopt multiple perspectives. We cannot have a unitary perspective and understand our society in a singular manner, because it will inevitably lead to neglect of other voices, other people who may not be getting recognized or who may not be actually, they will be able to fit into the grand narratives. Obviously, they will be excluded from the mainstream. They will be at the periphery. So therefore, the fragmentary and subjective approach is useful because it is helpful in drawing attention to the poor and marginalized section of the society. Now, again, we are talking about mass media. Due to influence of mass media and use of technology in our daily lives, people are getting divorced from social realities. Now, till now, we were talking the same thing from a theoretical perspective. Now, we are using those theoretical perspective to understand the reality, or we are trying to understand our present society. Now, let us understand in some detail that how the use of mass media and technology is making people distant from their real lives. We have seen the instances of mass media in our previous lecture, how it is helping us to stay more in the virtual world. You have seen the video games which are being played by the children, even by the adults, how they, they induce the children and the individual to live to enjoy in a virtual reality which is nowhere connected with the real world. How the excessive use of violence in those virtual video games influences their thought processes, and ultimately how it leads to changes and transformation in the behavior of the individuals and especially the children, and how it induces them to be so violent in their or so aggressive in their behavior. So this is one example to illustrate that how we try to learn, we learn many things from the virtual reality, believing that they are true, and adopt them in the real world without knowing that if we use the tactics of the virtual world in the real world, then we have to face so many grave consequences. It is ignorance or the gap between the real world and the virtual world. So, this is one example. Besides that, the use of technology. See, we all are living in an age of internet. Everybody is using internet technology. We are continuously living in the virtual world. We are accessing everything on the online platform. Everything is now getting converted to online technologies. And there are multifarious impacts of the use of these technologies on our physical lives, on our mental lives, on our emotional well-being. So it is not simply the economic and social impact which needs to be studied in terms of the impact of technology, but also our emotional and also our mental well-being. For example, you know that how the addiction towards mobile phone is creating so much of mental problems and psychological problems amongst the youth in the present times. Many, anti and de-addiction centers have been established across our country so that the people can get rid of their addiction to mobile technology or mobile phone. So the technology, they have been invented to make our lives easier, and they are supposed to be controlled by the human beings. Human beings are supposed to be their masters, and the technology are supposed to be their instrument to be controlled by them. But on the contrary, what has happened? These technologies have become our master and they are controlling our lives. Such a inversion of position or role is extremely proving to be dangerous to the human well-being. And you know that there are various diseases which have been associated with the rise of the process of modernization. And these diseases have been labeled as modernization diseases. And some of these diseases are not only related to our physical well-being, but they are also related to our mental well-being. And one of the most commonly cited example of the physical illness is the rise in the cases of obesity. Even this problem has infected the population of India, which is now increasingly becoming the capital of obese people. Earlier, it was located only to the Western world. Because of our continuous use of technology, sitting at one place, doing very, less physical activity, we are becoming obese. Secondly, the type of food that we are consuming, the ready-made food, that is also of very high calorie. So when combined with intake of rich and high calorie food along with the, less exercises and leading a sedimentary lifestyle, it leads to rise of obesity. So this is one problem, and associated with it is the rise of the issues of high blood pressure, heart attacks, and followed by the rise in the cases of cancer. So these are only the physical ailments. I've given some of the example. And the second is the rise in the cases of suicides, rise in the cases of alienation, rises in the cases of depression, which are nothing but modernization diseases. They are the impact of the various processes and forces of modernization on our lives. And if we try to define the meaning of alienation, which we have already done in our, I think, week 1 lecture, and also I think in the week 2 or 3 lecture, where I have explained that alienation is the distancing or estrangement from our real being. When we become separate, when we become detached from our true self, real self, then we suffer the process of alienation. And what the postmodernists are talking the same thing. We are becoming detached from our reality, whether it is a social reality or whether it is our own real self. We are getting detached, and this detachment is causing alienation. And when there is extreme alienation, it leads to depression followed by suicidal tendencies. And the rise of suicides amongst youth is another very important impact which can be attributed to the rise of a sense of extreme deprivation amongst the youth, where they are not able to cope with the realities of their or the challenges of their life. So, when people are not connected to social realities, they live in a virtual world, unable to fight for their real social issues. Now, this is a very, very dangerous phenomenon, because in our previous lectures, we have been talking about the need for a deliberative democracy. We have been talking about the need for a more robust and active democracy where citizens are playing an active role. On the one hand, we are talking about this. On the other hand, we are finding that the forces of modernization are making people unable to discover, even understand what their real problems are. Because fighting for the problems, challenging them, revolting against them will occur only when we know that what are our problems. Unfortunately, this absence of consciousness is, I think, one of the most important and foremost barrier that is needed to be addressed if you want to actually talk about how to mitigate the ills of modernization. Now, we have already discussed the topic of feminism. In that, we have understood the need for raising consciousness. Because most of the time, I'm giving this example because feminism also draws from postmodernist ideas. Most of the time, we find that women who are being subjected to lots of discrimination and inequality, they are not aware of that. They consider that their present situation is their destiny. It is a social system ordained by the religious scriptures, which they cannot challenge. To fulfill certain functions is a destined role which has been fixed by the God or fixed by a religious authority, which is true and which cannot be changed. This lack of awareness is responsible for multifarious instances of violation or exploitation of women taking place at multiple levels, multiple dimensions, without the woman being aware that she is being exploited. So, therefore, raising consciousness has been a very important function of all critical traditions. And unfortunately, the influence of media and technology is making us to spend majority of our time in the virtual world, and you know that the social consequences are that we are disconnecting ourselves or spending less time with our family members, with our children, and with our other neighbors in the society. Our social relations have been reduced. Our social relations have been snapped. And these are having enormous consequences for the human well-being, because human beings are social animals. We fulfill our majority of our needs, whether physical or emotional, from the social relations that we have built over the years. When these social relations are getting destroyed and we are spending a major part of our time in the virtual world, then the type of sustenance and support we used to get earlier from the society is lost. So, this social support or social care and sustenance, which earlier formed the strength of individual or the support of the civil society, which earlier constituted the backbone of individuals' well-being, now that is increasingly getting lost. With the disintegration of family, with the breakdown of the joint family and the rise of nuclear family, with the advent of the system of single parenting, accompanied by the loss of this social support is creating enormous physical, mental, and emotional challenges for the modern day youth. So, these all problems are interconnected with each other, and we have to understand from a comprehensive perspective. And the next is another very alarming development, which is major institutions and ideas of modernity have led to hyper-conformity among the citizens. Now, this is a very important phenomena which is the characteristic feature of modern lives. Conformity, to conform, to agree to whatever is being given to us or what is being prescribed to us. And when there is an exaggerated tendency to perform the most frequent behavior witnessed in other individuals, we say that it is hyperconformity. Why conformity is being criticized? Conformity is criticized because to an extent it is good to maintain unity and stability in the society. Some degree of conformity is essential. But beyond that, unquestioning identity, uncritical conformity is very dangerous. And hyperconformity, it is equally more dangerous in terms of the proportion to which one conforms. It is antithetical to creativity. It is completely in contradiction to the critical mindset, because when you conform, you cannot criticize, you cannot question. To have a critical mindset, you have to be non-conformist. You cannot have both the ways. And the modern institutions and modernity forces have created a phenomena of hyperconformity. And this conformity can be visible around you in terms of the types of dresses we want to wear, the type of styles we want to follow, the type of behavioral pattern which is expected for example, a particular gender or a particular community. All these are nothing but an example of hyperconformity. In his work, Fragments, Jean Baudrillard have argued how media images have superseded reality, about which we have already discussed. Further, how the use of technology is deadening human experience. Very, very important part. Human experiences versus technology. Why human experiences are important? Because human experiences helps us in learning from our experiences. It provides us knowledge to understand our reality and also to better our lives for our future endeavors. But these human experiences are getting dead because of the impact of technology, because now we are having experiences of the virtual world more than the experiences of the real world. The majority of the time in the 24 hours is spent in front of computer or laptop or in front of mobile phones. So how do you expect that we are going to learn from our experiences? For example, we find children, they prefer to play video games inside the room rather than go out and play in the fields. So playing football, playing cricket provides us an experiential understanding or enjoyment, which is today, is increasingly getting disappeared among the kids. Similarly, earlier, if you remember, the amount of time we used to spend with each other by visiting each other's places and the time we used to devote with each other in the various public spheres, for example, in the park, in the coffee houses, is getting increasingly reduced. So, because of this, we find that it is deadening human experience. Baudrillard argues how people get distant from reality by quoting an instance of the opening ceremony of the Olympic Games of 1992. If you remember, you watching some cricket match or some Olympic games or any other games for that matter, you find that huge TV screens are erected at those places so that those people who are at the back, they can also watch the cricketers or the players playing. But what is happening? The scholar argues that instead of people watching the live performances, they prefer to watch the performance of the player on the TV. So the giant screen are actually being considered as reality by the people who are sitting in the stadium rather than the real people who are playing there on the field in flesh and blood. Similarly, he argues that there are many such instances in the society. For example, there is another instance when we, after the advent of camera, and now with the help of very high quality camera which are available on the mobile phones, when we visit some places, our focus is not on witnessing or enjoying the actual situation or the places where we have visited, but we are more interested in capturing those moments, capturing those scenes with the help of our camera so that we can go back and at some point of time in future we may enjoy those pictures. But perhaps today in the world, in the digital world, we don't have time to go back and have a look at the numerous pictures, thousands of pictures we may have stored in our pen drives. So instead of enjoying the real life experiences of visiting a place, we are more interested in living those experiences with the help of the mobile camera, or for that matter any camera, rather than the real scenes or the enjoying the real natural beauty. So therefore individuals in society are getting isolated from reality and more dependent on images and signs. Bodria also argues how political campaigns through advertising divorces individual from the actual understanding of society. It helps in preventing discussion on power and control and how they are getting exercised. Very, very important. Now today in the age of media, Bodria was writing so many years back when there was not so much of advent of the different types of social media. Now we are bombarded with so many platforms of social media and how they are being used for advertisement, for campaigns by the political parties. Besides that, the traditional forms of campaign in the form of posters, in the form of leaflets, pamphlets, what they are projecting? Are they projecting something which is real, which is connected with our political lives? Bodria said no. They are actually portraying a picture of political a society or a type of government, for example, which is not connected with the reality, because many promises, many claims are made in the manifestos of the political party which are not actually realized and which are only they are staying in the dreams of the people. So therefore, by portraying certain vision of society through those advertisements, they are hiding the various exercises or nuances of power and control which is exercised by the political elite in a country. So in the garb of those grand visions, the people are not able to understand that how the power is being subtly exercised by the political elites and how they are being used as a medium and a means to attain the objectives to gain, for example, more power or to form government at the center or at the state level. So therefore, these understandings are important to understand how things are working in the society. F. Jameson pointed towards the paralyzing effects of thinking in totalizing terms in society, how it impacts on our thinking. Because ultimately, whatever we do is guided by our thoughts. The thoughts come first, which then translates into action. If we are not able to think, because human beings are the thinking animals, and that is our main strength. If that strength is lost, if you are not able to think in a rational and critical manner, then the entire purpose or entire existence of human being is called into question. And I would like to quote his words. What happens is that the more powerful the vision of some increasingly total system or logic, the more powerless the reader comes to feel. And the impulses of negation, revolt, and social transformation are increasingly perceived as vain and trivial in the face of the model itself. So, in a way, the grand or the meta narratives, they are so overwhelming that they try to intimidate the individual into obedience, or they try to paralyze their thinking process in multiple ways. Some of them we have already discussed, and therefore they are not able to think, or they do not dare to revolt, they do not dare to ask questions, and they know that even if they raise their voices, it will not bring any changes in the system. It will not bring any changes in the perspective of the state, because the state is giant. In the modern society, Gandhi has said that the modern state has become so giant that the individual has become a micro unit in front of that. On the other hand, it should have been, the state would have been a much smaller entity, and the individual and its power should have been a much larger and a much powerful entity. But that role has shifted. Instead of empowerment of the citizen, the state has acquired more and more power. So therefore, every citizen in his or her individual capacity feels helpless and powerless in face of the might of the state, which is propagating or propounding a grand ideology. So that has a paralyzing impact on our thinking and also on our mode of behavior. So with that understanding of how postmodernist analyzes the present society, I come to the end of this lecture, followed by some questions which are based on what we have covered in today's lecture. The first is how postmodernists help in understanding society. Explain the meaning of hyperconformism, how technology is deadening human experience. These questions are followed by two more questions which are aimed at steering your imagination. The first is, do you feel that in the present society the people are not able to raise their voice against issues of their concern because they are divorced from reality? This you have to explain with the help of some examples. Second, do you think that media helps in generating conformist behavior among the citizen? Explain with the help of some examples. So with that, I come to the end of this lecture. Hope you have enjoyed it. Thank you very much.